cutting leather is going to be a major part of any leatherworker's hobby. Some of the tools are really common, some of them are very specialized to leatherworking, and I'm going to talk about quite a few of these here. And at the end of the video, I'll say what I think a beginner needs, but it will depend a little bit on what type of leatherworking you're going to do. I'm kind of a generalist, so I do a little bit of everything, so I've got a little bit of everything in the tools. But we'll start with my absolute favorite that you'll see in almost every video is round knives. They're sometimes called head knives, or round head knives. The one company that makes them in the US I know of is CS Osborne. And this is what they refer to as a round knife. And what CS Osborne refers to as a head knife instead of a round knife is a little bit different shape in that it's sort of, instead of a half circle, it's more of like a third of a circle, which makes these points on the ends sharper. So instead of coming all the way back, they come down and at a sharper angle. And that makes where the knife will cut around corners and cut tighter corners. They're pretty much used the same way though. Both of them can be used for cutting with the corners to cut out your patterns, and they can be used in the center for trimming or for skiving. Very useful knives. Now they are really thin blades. The one that I made for myself is about a 1/16 of an inch, as the one from Osborne, which is, I think it was 50 thousandths of an inch. Well, with a really fine edge. Instead of a bevel and a secondary bevel set up like you would normally have on a knife, they're ground out like they're about half the angle, almost what you would normally have as a primary bevel on a knife, is the angle that they're ground all the way to their edge. So instead of the 20 degrees that you would sharpen most knives at, you sharpen these at about 10. So it gives them a really fine edge. But they're not supposed to cut anything except leather and work on a cutting board. You're not ever supposed to use them where they're going to hit anything, because they do have a fine edge. You will damage it. They're not real good for beginners though, because there's no real safe way to use them. Obviously, you always keep your hand behind them and push them away from you, but they cut right through most leathers. I've even cut up their saddle skirting in a single pass with these. One of the advantages of using a knife like this is that it will cut straight through the leather, nice and even. It doesn't pinch the leather, it doesn't cut through at a weird angle, unless you're not using it right. One of the problems with a round knife for a beginner though is that it does need to be maintained. You do need to sharpen it and strop it a lot, and a lot of beginners learning how to use a knife as well as learning how to sharpen a knife is a lot of learning curve to pick up. So it's not necessarily the best thing for a beginner to pick up as a starting tool, even if it is kind of a very versatile tool. And they're also not very cheap. I think an Osborne knife is around $50. Another common tool that people are going to recognize are various types of leather shears. And I'll use the term shears. Sometimes I'll say scissors, but usually shears is actually the right term for these tools. There is a difference between scissors and shears, and it has to do with the angle that the cutting edges are ground at. For the most part, most people are not going to know that difference and not going to care. This is a little cheap pair that I use all the time. They're very useful. I mostly use them for cutting paper and thread. They will sometimes cut pieces of leather. They are actually capable of doing it, but you always want to keep a pair of scissors that are just for paper, so that you don't use your good pairs of leather shears for cutting paper, because you don't want to dull them. So I have two different ones here. This pair is a little bit lighter weight and sharper, and it's really good for cutting lightweight and soft leathers like upholstery leathers. They're basically just sewing scissors, only they've got a longer distance to the fulcrum for where your hand is, so you've got more leverage on them. and one side of them is ground almost at 90 degrees, not quite. The other side is ground like a blade. And that's what I meant by the difference between shears and scissors. So this is a pair of leather shears specifically for the job. This pair is quite a bit heavier, and they have a bit of a small serrations on the side that's to just hold, the side it's supposed to shear against, which is the almost 90-degree side, whereas the other side is sharp. And this is for cutting heavy leathers, like this 8-ounce leather. It cuts right through. These will even cut up to almost saddle skirting, but it's a lot of work on your hands to do so. They're very useful. Again, the one problem is that when you use shears or scissors, what I said the round knife doesn't do, where it pinches as it cuts through, these will leave kind of a curved in cut along that edge, or it'll cut across at an angle, or it'll leave it curved out depending on where you are on your cut. So you won't get a straight through cut on the leather, which is why I don't often use pairs of shears to cut things. Only on soft leathers a lot of times will I use shears. So these are usually actually at my sister's house, and I don't normally keep them here. I happen to have them right now. I do keep these because, like I said, I will use it on soft leathers. But the ones I use most often are the cheap little pair. Again, just for a quick little nip of something or a cutting thread. So that's a very useful pair to have, of just a cheap pair of scissors that's fairly heavy, fairly sturdy, so that it doesn't just bend out of the way if you try to cut something a little too heavy with them. Another somewhat specialized tool, but you can find these almost anywhere because these are used a lot by people who do work with cloth for quilting and things like that, is a rotary cutter. It looks like a pizza cutter. It's kind of basically that same idea. You've got a really sharp little blade here that spins, and you can actually roll it along. The advantage to this tool is that on soft, stretchy leathers like upholstery leather, deer skin, things like that, it's always pushing down on it as it goes across, so it doesn't stretch it. And it'll cut through without winding up pushing it all over the place and causing trouble. So you can get nice straight cuts on soft, stretchy leathers. It's hard to use a pair of scissors or shears to cut straight because it's flopping around a lot. And to use a knife that you have to push or pull, it'll push or pull the leather around, and you wind up again with your cuts wandering or your leather stretched out of shape. So this is a very useful thing for anybody that's doing garment work, soft leather bags, pouches, and things like that. So that's a useful tool that you can pick up almost anywhere. Other leather knives, some of them are common, like X-Acto knives and basic utility knives. Some of them are a little less common. For specialized, real delicate places, I will use an X-Acto knife. They've got really thin blades that are easy to break off if you're trying to cut too hard with them in heavy leathers. So it takes a little bit of finesse to use one. I wouldn't suggest it for trying to cut through heavy leathers. You're just going to be sitting there carving away at it. If you're going to cut through a heavy leather and you want something that's just cheap and easy with replaceable blades, a regular utility knife you can find at a hardware store is great. You can even get these where the blades, you can break them off and have a fresh section of blade to cut with. I know a lot of leather workers that use those, and even people that have been at it for a long time and don't like using the round knife will use just knives like this, and particularly because they don't want to sharpen the round knife, because you can just buy a huge thing of blades, which this one's almost empty, but this was a pack of 50 blades that I got for, I think it was 10 or 15 bucks. It wasn't much, and you can just replace the blades as needed. This tool and this shaped blade, it has interchangeable blades, but there's also ones where you can get where they're built as a solid knife. It's very similar to like a Kiridashi style knife, and it's used as a trim knife. It's used for cutting along an edge. If you're laminating two pieces together, to line a piece and you leave the one piece sticking out further, you would use this to trim that edge to where they match. It's not a tool I use very often. I will most often use the utility knife or my round knife to do that job. But there are specialized tools for it. And there's also ones that have a kind of hooked blade where the inside of the hook is sharpened. And that is for the same idea, just kind of to drag it along in there. And that hook kind of keeps the leather inside the cutting edge. Some of the really specialized tools of the leatherworker are tools for cutting lace and straps. And I've got 3 different ones of those, and the reason is because they're kind of 3 different applications. This is a lace cutter. In particular, this is called an Australian strander. It's got little blades here that are the same blades that the skiving tools use. So you can buy at a leather store at least these old injector razor blades and just change out the blade when you need a new fresh blade for it. And it's just loosen a screw, put it in, and actually you can flip it around and move it around a little bit to get sharp spots on the blade several times before you need to change it out. But it's a very sharp little tool. It has a thumb wheel here that can help you adjust the width of lace that you're cutting, and this goes from basically almost nothing all the way up to about a 1/2 inch, and will cut up to about 4 or 5 ounce leather, or for cutting lace that I'm going to use for braiding. And it's kind of a little tricky to get it started sometime on softer leathers. You want to sort of mark where it is and give it a bit of a cut to get it started. And then you just pull the lace through. Trying to keep it flat. It is not as good at soft stuff like this as it is with something that's got a little bit of body to it. But you can cut leather lace fairly easily with it. And you can also take and spiral this around an entire side of leather. So you can take an entire side, you cut off the shoulder, you cut off the belly, or most of the belly, and you round out any of the corners up on the rump of the hide, and you can just start spiraling around and cut very long pieces of lace. I'm talking like 100-yard pieces of lace can be cut once you get used to this tool, and just keep going. It's used a lot by whip makers. It has an advantage over other lace cutters in that you can taper strands, which is why whip makers will use it. You can actually, as you're cutting, you can be sitting here adjusting this thumb wheel and rolling it up and making the lace wider as you go. This tool is a very common and useful little tool called a strap cutter, which I've mentioned in other videos. Pretty much it has an adjustment screw here and another one kind of over here. And then it's got a blade hidden away down in here, and you can get replacement blades for these. But this adjustment screw on the top you can loosen, and you set it to whatever width strap you want by the rulers that are on here. It's got it, standard and metric measurements. And you just set it to whatever width you want and lock it back down. There's also, you can set for the thickness of leather you want by adjusting this side and loosen the blade and adjust it on this side as well, obviously before you adjust for width. This is a vital tool for most leather workers. If you're going to cut straps and belts, you need one of these. You just have to lay a straight edge down your piece of leather, and then you can use a strap cutter like this to cut it nice straight straps that you're going to use for a ton of different things. Lots of stuff needs straps. The older version of that tool is what's called a draw gauge. And this is a very specialized little tool and somewhat dangerous because it's got this really nice, heavy, sharp blade that sticks right up out there in front of everything. The reason I had it laying down on the bench turned over like this is because that's kind of about the only safe way to lay one down. Otherwise, you will have it sitting up here, kind of rocking around with a nice sharp edge right there where you can catch your hand on it if you're not paying attention. So you should always lay these down turned over. There's some advantages and disadvantages, obviously, to a draw gauge. They have the same sort of setup that you can adjust the width. One of the disadvantages is your leather piece can kind of bow up and you can wind up with a wide spot in it if you're not paying attention with these, because it doesn't have that second bar over the top. The blade is something you can resharpen rather than just replace. So again, it takes a little bit of knowledge and expertise to resharpen rather than replace the blade. They're quite a bit more costly usually than a strap cutter. The advantages they have, these work a lot better in heavier leathers. If you're cutting stirrup leathers for a saddle and you want to cut something out of like really heavy leather, these will work better because they've got a thicker, heavier blade, and you don't break the blades as much. You don't have as much trouble with it binding up. Also, you're working against a solid piece here. So basically you just have to worry about one point on here and the cutting edge of your blade for your width of your strap. And it's going to follow straight through after that. So this has a certain application that is better for than the strap cutter, because the strap cutter is hollow in between. And that is if you're not actually following directly along a straight edge. And that's why I have one, is because I was using this tool to cut long pieces of leather the same way I would use a lace cutter. I would take 10 to 11 ounce latigo and cut out 3/4 or 1 inch wide straps from it. And instead of just following along a straight edge on the hide, I would spiral all the way around the hide. And I was cutting usually about 55 feet at a time, because I was making sets of reins for a carriage company, and the carriage company wanted 22-foot long reins without a splice in them if I could make them. I told them, well, yeah, that's possible. So it's something that I wound up showing to a saddle maker who thought it was the most amazing thing. He'd never seen anybody do anything like it. So I know it's not a common technique, but it is something that a draw gauge can do that a strap cutter cannot do. And that is, you can follow and pull those straps straight then after you've got them cut. But that is an application I'm not expecting many people to need. Mostly the advantage is that it's much better with heavy leathers than the strap cutter. So it is a good tool to have in the arsenal for anybody that's going to be doing really heavy straps. It also gives you, with this kind of pistol grip setup, it gives you a really solid grip that you can pull on. Again, really good for heavy straps. So this is more of a specialized saddle maker's tool. And the last thing I have here on the bench that's a cutting tool, but not actually for leather, is you'll probably need a pair of nippers or side cuts like these. Cutting rivets, especially if you're going to set heavy copper rivets, you're going to need these. These are available at any hardware store. I also use them if I set a rivet and it's not right, or something goes crooked or sideways or weird, or a snap goes bad. I can use these to cut it apart, pull it apart, and get the leather pieces apart again so I can reset them and do it right. So in summary, what I think a beginning leather worker is going to need out of this pile of stuff: a fairly heavy, good pair of scissors. Like I said, cutting paper, cutting thread, maybe cutting leather. Very useful to have. I always keep one here on the bench. A basic utility knife of some sort, and extra blades. That's the best thing to start with. You don't have to worry about learning how to sharpen or anything like that. Just go straight on to cutting things out, and it will cut nice straight through the leather. You can do fairly tight curves with it without too much difficulty. You will get some wobble in the blade, so it's not quite as good as a heavier blade like a round knife as far as cuts, but very excellent and good for a beginner, and not much learning curve. The other tool I think a beginner would need is a strap cutter. Always an important tool. I think everybody should have a strap cutter that wants to do their own leather work, because straps are important. And if you're going to do lightweight stuff, garment work, soft bags, if you're going to work with deer skin, I would say go to a fabric store and get yourself a rotary cutter. So, of all these tools, these 4 are the ones I think a beginner should really start with. If you have any other questions about any of the leatherworking tools or techniques, go ahead and put something in the comments below. I might know something about it and be able to make another video. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or entertaining, please consider hitting that like button. And maybe even subscribe to the channel. If you haven't decided yet, there's always watching another video from this channel, and any one of the above will help this channel grow. And thank you for watching.